2024. We got an election coming up, potentially TikTok being shut down, new platforms that will take over. What do you think is coming down the pipeline for this year?
It's going to be a lot of change. 51% of the world is having elections this year.
Wow.
Huge shakeup. This year, AI is poised to replace 300 million jobs. Next year, it's 1 billion. We have a live example of how this plays out, and it's not good. Admittedly, TikTok is a bit of a nightmare. It is definitely contributing to deteriorating mental health, but I don't think banning it is the right thing to do, and here's sort of why. The West has been under sort of this liberal rule for such a long time that all these governments are doing more and more tyrannical shit to stay in power. And you're seeing it with all the censorship tools, and the thing is, it's not unique to here. They're everywhere in the West. It is so wild what's happening right now.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to see you again, man. Thanks.
Good to see you. Good to see you for part 2. So, I want to chat a bunch of stuff today. State of affairs, politics. We'll talk TikTok. We'll talk business. We'll talk Instagram and content. I know you guys got shut down, so you'll share a little bit about that story and sort of what the resolution was. And of course, we could splash into some AI, and we got our man Kwame over here behind the scenes, so he might throw in a couple zingers as well. But why don't we kick off with the whole creating content? Like, what is it like creating content? I mean, you've gone through a lot of reiterations in regard to, designing and creating content to what you just said, which is hopefully going to instill thought and challenge idea and gain perspective. So what's it like building or creating content today, specifically in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about content is there's two things that need to happen. First of all, you need to be interested in what you're doing, right? Because otherwise it's see-through. People know that you don't care and you don't do the research. Or in my case, you don't do that deep research, and it's not very comprehensive, content. And the other thing too is it is work, right? Like sometimes, you hop on a podcast, this is a good time. But if I'm doing my podcast for Blendr, I'm doing it twice a week religiously. I have to do the newsletter every day. You have to enjoy what you're doing or you won't stick with it. So I think that's one of the things you have to look at. And then when I say enjoy it too, I also mean you have to enjoy the format. I'll be absolutely honest, man. I feel the best in my car. I still do videos at the kitchen table or in the office or these other places. When I'm in the car, I'm in my own zone. I love it the most. Right. So like what I mean by that is you want to find a format and then a place and a way to do content that you enjoy and you're comfortable with. Otherwise, I feel like it comes out a little broken as well. Yeah. And then in terms of the other side, which is really the audience, I don't necessarily think you should create content just to fuel your audience. I think you kind of get lost a little bit in that sense. So I think the first filter is like what you're doing and, like the format that you're using. And then your audience does have to be engaged and interested. And I think that's where you iterate through those lines, right? So that's kind of what we've done. I mean, if you look back before the pandemic, I was doing videos in my car about entrepreneurship. I had a modest, I should say. I had about 15,000 followers. Yeah. They were off the cuff videos. I just made them up as I went along. But I didn't really grow much from it, but I liked it. So I just kept doing it, But then I did the Mars report for a little bit after COVID. That kind of flopped. I just didn't love the format. And then finally we fell into Blendr, over the last 6 months or so, 6-7 months. But you're gonna iterate and change over time. One of the things that's tough though is people feel like they're letting an audience down by stopping and changing. But at the end of the day, I hate to say this, no one really cares. Right. Like if you stop doing it, their lives don't change that much. Right. It's cool. If you need to, iterate or change something, go ahead and do it. Yeah. No big deal.
Yeah. There's that great meme, and I'm going to butcher it, right? It's got a picture of like the Earth, and it says, the Earth before X, Y, and Z and the Earth after X, Y, and Z. It's the same picture, right? And the whole exercise is, really, at the end of the day, what you just described, life will continue, people will move past. But maybe that's where there's that success of, as long as you're staying consistent. And as you said, you're doing what you love and it's authentic and genuine, build it, they will come.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't love doing the news every day, but I think it's a service that needs to be.
Did you ever think in your life that you were going to become like a news reporter?
Dude, it's so funny. It's like I fell into this through COVID by talking in my car because I was so frustrated with the state of the world. Right. And it just kind of snowballed into this. Right. But if someone had been like, "Hey, do you think you're going to be a journalist?" I'd be like, "No, that's insane. What are you talking about?" Right. It just sort of happened.
Yeah. So did you consider yourself a journalist?
No, I think that's a strong word to use. I just can't think of a better one.
Maybe like a journalist in training.
Yeah, what's interesting? Like if I were really to do the things that I wanted to do when it comes to what I'm working on,
Right.
I would do a lot more investigative journalism. I really like it.
Yeah.
I don't really know what, you'd say designates you as a journalist these days.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like what my approach was through COVID, right?
Right.
You take a topic, what was going on, and then I'd break it down. I'd do all the investigating. I'd get the real answers for people. I'd put it in this sort of 8 to 10 minute video that was very succinct and data driven. And I'd sort of explain the situation. That pretty much is investigative journalism, right?
Yeah.
I enjoyed that the most. It's just the way I sort of approached Blendr was, hey, there needs to be a more, I hate to say it, but there needs to be more conservative viewpoint. And I'm not doing it to be conservative. I'm doing it because the liberal media, which is really 90+% of our media in Canada, really is only giving you one perspective of the situation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we went with Blendr. But if it were up to me, I would love to do like 1 to 2 articles, a week of deep investigative journalism that I'm writing on and doing videos on that. But I just don't think it would be as good a service right now. So that's where my focus is there.
We were actually chatting. Kwame actually asked me this earlier. He's like, do you see different news in Costa Rica? I'm like, it's completely different. I literally will come to Canada and I'll flip on some of those profiles and it will say blocked. You cannot digest this content.
Wow.
So, back to the liberal media and sort of the control, the governance they have over that. What's that like navigating it? I mean, by definition, let's go there. Your first account got shut down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was Bill C-18.
Bill C-18, the Online News Act. Yeah.
So what happened there?
Bill C-18 was the bill put in by Trudeau, which basically states that social media platforms and search engines have to pay Canadian media to share their content, which is preposterous, right? Because every media channel gets the same opportunity you and I get to reach the entire world in a split second using their tools. I think that's good enough. We don't get paid for our content unless we do really well and have sponsors, but we don't get paid by these platforms. So it's preposterous to think that the government can now mandate that these platforms, it's a shakedown that these platforms now have to pay, Canadian media. And what's ridiculous is it's not all Canadian media. It's selected Canadian media, which is selected by the government. So the government uses their own filter. And it's kind of a win-win for Trudeau. So when he did this, he knew what was going to happen, right? So it was one of two things. Either he gets hundreds of millions of dollars every year to fund his media conglomerate. That's what that is. Or all media shuts down on these platforms. And people are like, well, he wouldn't have known that was going to happen. No, he did, because it happened in Australia in 2021. He knew that if the government tried to shake down these platforms, they would either give them money or they would block all news. The significance of blocking all news is that it kills guys like me. It kills independent media. It kills that 10% that I hope exists, where there's an alternative independent viewpoint. So for him, it was a win-win. He didn't really care. In fact, I think this was his first place prize. I think being able to shut us down was what they wanted. So how that works for us, it's really only on Instagram and Facebook. However, Instagram is probably the most significant platform for independent media right now. Don't get me wrong. There are some people that do really well on just YouTube and some people that do really well on TikTok. But at scale, I would say that Facebook and Instagram are sort of your number one tool, right? So what they did was they just blocked anybody that was producing or creating news. So we had, I think we were about 3-4 months in and we had about 17,000 followers. And we just one day gone. And then we reached out to Instagram and they were super nice, but they basically said, hey, look, this is a government protocol and we can't do anything about it. So my question to them was, I'm like, well, are you not the one sort of managing this? They're like, no, actually, it's a government group. So I was like, wait a minute. So a government group is actually the one that's shutting down all these platforms. It's their word that you're using. When you hear that, you kind of go, well, the way that it looks in the media is Instagram and Facebook versus the government. But they have a government group working with Instagram and Facebook to block all these news platforms, which means they're working hand in hand. The government is this. That's why I say it's his first place prize. They know exactly what they're doing. So we had to rebuild. V2 has been just a little different. So rather than having, text posts that sort of explain maybe a headline or third-party videos that are direct, something from the House of Parliament or something from a news channel that we just kind of brand as our own, we cut all of that. And now we're just doing our own take on the news in short little videos and then just clips from our podcast. So it's going well. I mean, we're close to the same. I think we're around maybe 12, 13,000 right now. So we're rebuilding. But what's frustrating is you can't share independent media without being censored in this country right now.
That's a real challenge. I mean, just on a pure business note, like, you're an entrepreneur. So the whole idea of like, let's say starting this business, right, to have these hurdles that you have to face and that you have to overcome, it's funny. They say entrepreneurs, describe them like entrepreneurs are a little bit wackadoodle. There is no rhyme and reason to entrepreneurs, right? And this is a good example of it, right? Which technically most people would give up, and you're saying, no, we just need to keep pushing through, which I think is amazing. I think is absolutely amazing. Do you think that maybe this was a good thing, that account getting shut down? And
In a sense, yeah, like it was. It sort of it motivated us to push a little harder. At
Right.
first, it took the wind out of our sails. Then we were like, okay, let's regroup and give it another push. And now our podcast is doing very well. It's grown substantially since then. So that's been good. The other thing too is I think it actually highlights the insanity.
Mm-hmm.
You say these things and people don't really see how it comes to life. They're like, oh, CBC got blocked. But when you're an independent platform that just started 6-7 months ago and you're already getting shut down, people go, oh, this is a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
So it was good in the sense that I think it highlighted, like, almost you're the martyr in a sense. You know what I mean? I don't feel that way, but that one account on that platform sort of was.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to highlight just how crazy things are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no kidding. Well, on that note, there's the whole conversation around TikTok right now, right? The shutting down of TikTok. So thoughts around that, and I mean, from how have you been covering that story?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, this is interesting, right? Admittedly, TikTok is a bit of a nightmare. It is definitely contributing to deteriorating mental health. And there's no doubt that this information is going to CCP for sure, right?
Yeah.
What they do with this data, I don't know. But there's a couple things I would like to point out. So, yes, TikTok's a problem, but I don't think banning it is the right reason, is the right thing to do. And here's sort of why. First of all, China has infiltrated everything in the United States. If you want to take something from Tucker Carlson, if you want to stop China from infiltrating your society, how about stop them from owning all the farmland?
Yeah.
It's wild how much they own down there.
Yeah.
But then the other thing too, you kind of go, okay, well, what's different between TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter? Really not much. A little bit, but not much. So what makes TikTok so bad? So I'm of the mind that if you're blocking this platform, well, if you're not blocking all of them, then why block one? Why single them out?
Yeah.
The other thing too is what happens when you take TikTok away? What's going to happen? Someone else is going to jump in with another tool. It's just going to
be another platform that pops up overnight.
That's exactly it. So when they say like, oh, we're doing it for the kids and it's deteriorating this or that, it's like, it is doing those things, but that's not why you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing it because you don't want China to have any horse in the race here. You don't want them to have this information. That's really what it comes down to. So I'm of the mind that it's not really the right solution. I think the other problem you run into as well, how many people make a living on that platform? Like, I mean, there must be 100 million accounts in the US, right? Yeah. And I would say 1% to 2% of those do very well and that's their business. So now you're talking about 2 million Americans that are going to suffer because you shut this platform down. And look, I realize that people don't own those. They don't necessarily own the account because it is owned by TikTok and they could shut it down anytime they want.
Sure.
But at the end of the day,
their vehicle.
Well, there's sort of a known quantity there, right? You kind of go, well, TikTok makes money. They're growing and expanding. They're going to continue improving these tools. You look at the trajectory of these other platforms. That's kind of what they've done. Right. You can you have a reasonable amount of confidence that it's going to stick around. And then for the government just to pull it out from under you to say, well, we're doing it for Americans. It's like, are you really?
Yeah.
Is that really what's going to happen here? And then for Canada to sort of echo, like Canada said the other day.
Will Canada follow in this? Because I know it's been a big US conversation.
Right. So 2 days ago, I think it came out that Canada has been secretly investigating TikTok since September. And what they've said was it's because of national security threats. So if they feel that it's a national security threat, they will ban it.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen is if the States does, Canada will. For sure. Yeah. No question. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, we'll go hand in hand. I would see that happening. I mean, interesting year, huh? 2024. We got an election coming up.
Yeah.
All right. The potentially TikTok being shut down, new platforms that will take over. So, state of affairs. I mean, what do you think what do you think is coming down the pipeline for this year?
Well, it's actually interesting. There's not just elections here. Well, there actually aren't election years, but there are not just elections in the West. I think 51% of the world is having elections this year.
Wow.
Huge shakeup. Yeah.
Wow.
60% of the population, 51% of the the different like sections.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's gonna be a lot of change.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a lot of change right now. I think like I said earlier, I'm sort of politically agnostic. I don't really align with any one party, but I think what happens in politics is there's sort of this cyclical nature to it, right? Where the party gets in and for whatever, maybe call it 4 years, they affect somewhat positive change. But then after that, you sort of run out of policy to implement.
Mhm.
So then you start grasping at straws a little bit, maybe gender ideology, maybe all these other weird things, maybe all the censorship tools. So what happens is over time, when you've got no more policy, you sort of start enacting tyrannical policy to stay in power because you're losing your grip. And this is what happens to every party. It's not unique to the liberals. Conservatives will do the same thing in probably 10 years.
Mhm.
But we're at this point where there's sort of this Western liberal control that's happening. And you're starting to see that flip right now. You're seeing a lot of people move over to the right. It's not because one's necessarily better than the other all the time. It's just right now, the West has been under sort of this liberal rule for such a long time that all these governments are doing more and more tyrannical shit to stay in power.
Mhm.
And you're seeing it with all the censorship tools. And you see, and the thing is, it's not unique to here.
Mhm.
They're everywhere in the West. And it is so wild what's happening right now. So, I think a lot of people in the world are going, look, immigration's another big problem. They're going, look, we need to vote for the other party
Mhm.
because we need this to change. Then the other party can come in and affect positive change for 4 or 5 years. Then you're going to run into the same issue again. It's just going to happen. But I think right now, the world has very much had enough of where things are currently at because it's not working. It's just not working well.
It's not. People are not surviving. It's hard to earn. It's hard to live. It's expensive. I mean, look, what's happening? Is it April 1st? The carbon tax is going up.
Yeah, like
and
23%.
yeah, and I was just listening to this the other day, which is and HST is on top of that,
Yes.
right? So it's a tax on top of a
Yes.
tax.
They're going to make over $500 million in HST on the carbon tax this year.
Yeah, and where was it you I was listening to? You talk about like I think it was there was a statement that this is going to help fund universal basic income.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it was on the UNESCO website. So Canada hasn't directly admitted that, but on the UNESCO website, they were talking about implementing a universal basic income. And then they make this sort of coy remark and they say, oh, well, people are trying to wonder, how are you going to afford that? Well, we've got a great idea. And it's like the Western world is going to implement some sort of carbon tax to then make it affordable, which is what you're seeing, right? I don't know that that's exactly what's going to happen, but you're seeing it on the UNESCO website.
Yeah.
You're seeing Trudeau draw a very, very hard line about implementing it and increasing it.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like that's the way it's going. But a couple of other interesting things have happened that make me believe this. So first, 2 days ago, I think something came out that the Liberal government paid the World Economic Forum $493,000 to create propaganda for the carbon tax. That's all it was. They asked them literally to do a study to promote the carbon tax as this is the solution. Look, at the end of the day, paying a government money is not going to fix the climate. It's insane that they think that. So I don't know what other scientific evidence you're going to show me. It's full nonsense.
Right.
So they paid them that kind of money so they could get the support they wanted to continue increasing it, which Trudeau did a couple of months later after he got this report. The other thing too, which is why I think there's going to be a universal basic income in Canada, is how does Trudeau think he's going to stay in power? It doesn't matter what poll you look at, liberal, conservative.
This is my question. Like, is he going to stay in power? And how?
So here's how. If you look at all the polls, I was reading one the other day. Conservatives, super majority.
Yeah.
And then what happened was, if you actually look at our politics, right, we have 3 liberal parties and a conservative party. That's what we have, right?
Right.
So the Green, the NDP, and the Liberal, they're all liberal.
Right.
And then you have the conservatives on their own. So what these other parties said was, hey, if the conservatives are going to get a majority, we will vote liberal to make sure that he doesn't. That's what the Green and the NDP have said. Okay, got it. Unless Trudeau's in power, then they won't. So no matter how you skin this, nobody wants Trudeau in power anymore.
Yeah.
But here's what he does. Here's how he stays in power. By the tail end of this year, he implements a universal basic income. Because look at how untenable the country is right now in terms of affordability.
It's
wild, right?
It's completely wild.
So, but you got to ask yourself, how did we get to this place? But a lot of it is driven by policy.
Yeah.
A lot of it is driven by bad politics, printing $400 billion. So you can kind of look at him and go, you have played a big part in us getting here. And he's continuing to make it worse. Slowly, but it's getting worse. I mean, even the carbon tax, for example. Carbon tax is interesting, right? You're going to use it. You're going to increase it. It's going to drive inflation, but it's actually going to reduce spending. Yeah. That's really interesting because usually if you reduce spending, you quell inflation. But because he's introducing this tax, he's going to do both. That is insane. Like that's such a, you use that and go, that metric alone should be like, no, what are you doing increasing this right now? This is going to have such a bad effect on society. Anyway, my opinion is that he's getting to this point that it's unaffordable. And then what you do is you implement a universal basic income. So if you can't afford your life, so let's say like my wife and I, let's say we're struggling, right? Can't pay the bills, can't pay our credit cards, barely afford gas. He goes, $2,000 for you, $2,000 for you. Wow, we got $4,000 a month. Now I can pay rent again. Now I'm clearing up my bills. Still don't like Trudeau, but geez, this makes a lot more sense. Now I'm okay, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes 8 months later at the election, doesn't matter what his tagline is, the subtext will be, if you don't vote for me, you lose your allowance. Who are you voting for?
Fuck.
Right?
You know, it's scary how simple that plan is.
thing is, it's happening right now too.
Yeah.
Whether or not it goes, that's the way it goes. If you look at the sum of the parts, they're there.
This is the boiling frog analogy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the frog doesn't know it's being boiled, right? So you stick the frog in the cold water, right? And you turn it up, and obviously the temperature rises and rises and rises to a boiling point, but the frog doesn't move because it's just so slow of the temperature rise that eventually it boils to death.
And my problem with the universal basic income is sort of twofold. One is once that cat is out of the bag, how do you put it back in?
Yeah.
Because how can you then take that money away from me?
Yeah.
How much more affordable do you have to make my life before you can take that, say 4,000 in the case I gave you? How much more affordable do you have to make life so you can take that away and I'm okay? It's almost impossible. So now the conservative government, if they want to be in power, they have to get on board with it in some fashion.
Right.
So once it's out of the bag, I don't know how we fix it.
But what do you think? So now let's think about real estate for a sec, right? So I've always been sort of, interested in, by definition, someone that would invest in real estate. Canada's real estate is insane. The difference between what your income coming in versus the rise of costing of housing. How does this now universal basic income affect, call it, housing prices, right? I mean, I would imagine housing prices aren't going to come down.
No, they're not. We're not doing enough to drive them down, right? Because, here's the thing when you look at housing. Right now, they say we have a housing shortage. We have the least number of houses per capita in the G7. So, okay, we have an issue. Got it. So there's a couple things there. First, our infrastructure is a mess. We built more homes in 1972 than we did in 2023. That's wild. Our population was half.
Right.
20 million, now 40 million. We're doing a terrible job. So our infrastructure is the real problem. Obviously, you can look at the government and say, you're holding things up huge. We're second last of OECD nations from raw land to a built home. Yeah. So it takes forever. So there's a lot of bureaucracy and bullshit in the way, but you also need the infrastructure. So it's sort of this two-pronged thing. But so that makes it very hard for us to catch up. The other thing too is with immigration, we let in 1.4 million people last year. So if you look at StatsCan, they say that we have 2.5 people per home on average, right? So let's move that 1.4 million. Let's call it 1.5. We'll make the math easy, right? So divide that by 2.5, you get 600,000. We built 215,000 homes last year. To house the people that came in, we needed to build 600,000. Yeah. What are we doing? So it's like, you can give people a universal basic income if you want, but housing, like if looking at supply and demand, this is a huge mess. We need to curb immigration and we need to increase our infrastructure to actually build homes. Yeah. Those are such big parts of this equation. But yeah, I mean, obviously a universal basic income is going to keep the cost of homes high too, because, at the end of the day, it's going to create a huge financial problem for the country because we're not going to be able to afford it. How do you pay for a universal basic income? They say, well, we'll just increase taxes. Well, you can't. We're already the most taxed nation in the world, pretty much.
Yeah, I think, by the time you're done adding up all the tax here, you're close to 70%.
Yeah.
Between your HST, your income, your payroll, your home taxes, your carbon tax. Right? The tax on top of the carbon tax.
So you can't really add any more. Then they say, well, we're just going to crack down on those people that have been evading taxes. I'm like, well, look, if you could have done that, you already would have done that.
Right.
So that's not a solution. And if you think that you're going to be able to bully people that have money, they're going to move their money offshore. You're not going to be able to touch it. So there's no actual, other than the carbon tax, there's no viable plan to actually cover universal basic income. But if you look at the carbon tax, even if you quadruple it, it still falls way short of covering a universal basic income, like substantially.
Yeah.
So the only way you can do it is to print money. So if you have to print money, what's going to happen? Well, printing money is basically like increasing minimum wage.
Correct.
You increase minimum wage because people need more money to live. But what that does is it drives inflation, right? Because you have to increase your prices because all the minimum wage workers are working at all these stores. Got it. Same idea, but it's on steroids when you do it like this. It's the same thing that just happened through the pandemic, right? So we have a live example of how this plays out, and it's not good.
Talk to me about Pierre. What are your thoughts on Pierre?
I like Pierre. I met him. He's a really nice guy. I think he's very genuine.
Yeah.
I think he's going to do a great job. I think he's going to be an excellent leader, actually. Putting aside a lot of the current politics and all the issues, I think no matter what kind of period you were looking at through Canada's history, I think he's going to be a really good leader. I think he fits the bill really well. Do I think he's the end all and be all? No, absolutely not. I think the world is hyper politicized right now, and it's either you're right or you're wrong. That's how people see things. So
correct. There's no debate and dialogue.
No, and the problem with that is you can't really have a centrist government, right?
Right.
So when you look at what he can actually do, no matter what, he can only appease half the people, right? And he's only going to be able to implement policy that is going to affect change for the first 4 to 5 years. Then it's going to become this other hyper politicized. It's going to go back and forth. So I actually think he's a better leader than the impact he's going to make. But I mean, that's
interesting.
Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting if he gets a majority versus a minority. I think if he gets stuck with a minority government, I don't think Canada changes that much.
No.
I think if he gets a majority, he can make some substantial moves. What's interesting though too is the Senate's an interesting roadblock, right? The Senate is 77%, I believe, have been appointed by Justin Trudeau, and he says like, oh, they're not liberal. A lot of them are actual past liberals.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the other ones, like a lot of the other ones have received massive millions of dollars of grants from the government. They're all associated with, say, I don't mean anything bad by this, but they're all associated with like, equality, women's rights, LGBTQ stuff, which is fine. But that's a liberal landscape. So what I mean when I'm saying that is, you're drawing in very, very hard liberals when you're doing that. So 77% of the Senate is liberal.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a roadblock for him no matter what, even if he wins a majority, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, I think the good thing about Pierre is he's not afraid to repeal a lot of the nonsense that's been put in over the last few years and is kind of on its way through the pipeline.
Yeah.
So that will be very positive for us. But again, like I said, I actually think he's a better leader than the opportunity he's probably going to get.
Yeah. Can we go back to remember you're about to touch on like the search program and that we had to, you're going to say that's like an example of the universal basic income that we have. Do you think the whole idea that AI is supposed to generate, you're saying like, you might not be a way to cover it, but there's the idea that AI is supposed to generate more income to cover universal basic income. You think that?
Yeah, there's actually an interesting thought on AI. Maybe you want to get it. We can get into that.
Yeah.
I think I actually think AI is going to may replace modern capitalism.
In what way?
So if you look at what's happening right now, capitalism is based on a certain understanding of like the economic landscape. You have supply of goods and you have workers, and it works in this sort of symbiotic way where you can provide enough employment for people to kind of make the country go round. And it just sort of it's this perfect balance. I know it's imperfect, but there's a balance to it, right? So AI is going to do something where this year AI is poised to replace 300 million jobs. Next year, it's 1 billion.
What kind of jobs? Because we were chatting about this earlier, right? So
I'm sure a lot of it will be relatively menial early on.
Yeah.
It'll be all like simplistic stuff. So I have a buddy, AJ, who's got a medical practice.
Yeah.
He built a $7 million back end. He's the most efficient medical provider in Ontario by a landslide. But his infrastructure is like 1/10 anything run by the government, right?
Yeah.
So he replaces everybody in those roles with AI and all those other communication tools. So if you look at that whole chain, you go, okay, like, if you need an MRI, you contact the website, AI.
Yeah.
You book yourself, AI. Anything that happens, all the way till you show up,
that
AI.
Administrative role.
Everything, right? So you look, that whole job is just taken up by artificial intelligence. And that's just that one sector that I know of. So I think what's interesting about AI is it impacts every sector. So this is what's interesting. This technology is going to change everything substantially. So it's 300 million jobs this year. It's 1 billion next year. What is it by 2030?
Yeah.
It could be 3-4 billion. It could be half the world's workforce. You know what I mean? When you look at that, you kind of go, okay, well, if that's the case, then capitalism can't exist as it currently stands. It can't. If you have too many people unemployed, it would create this like the polarity between the wealthy and the poor would be insane. You'd have a revolution. It'd be wild. So I actually think we're going to go through this really interesting transition right now because AI can do so much more, but how do you balance it out?
How do you use it?
How do you extract the earnings from AI and disperse those in a way that makes sense? And I don't actually know. So I have this not weird, I guess it's a bit of a theory. It might be a little out there.
Skynet.
So just saying. So I'm kind of looking at what's going on in the world and what do you have if you don't have capitalism? Sort of. If you don't really operate in the world of capitalism, you're kind of working more towards communism. It's really one or the other in a sense, right? Now, there's problems with both. I prefer capitalism, obviously. Communism never really works.
Yeah.
But you're seeing this more and more in the West where they're kind of moving more towards this Marxist or more communism-driven society. They're working their way towards it.
Yeah.
And guys like us are pushing back. Now, if you think about it, if you think like who actually runs the world, you've got your global governments, but you have powerful corporations and powerful families. We all know that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
So I have this thought that AI is going to be the catalyst that is going to break down capitalism. So if you break down capitalism and don't have another solution in place at that time, what happens? Absolute chaos.
Right.
Absolute chaos. So I'm of the mind that the people that are running the world see this and know that that is happening. They are in cahoots with governments, as they always have been. Governments aren't doing this to be benevolent. They're being told what to do and they're doing it. I think they're slowly implementing some form of communism. And it's a strong word. I just don't know a better one to use. They're implementing this sort of form of communism so that when AI takes over, and I don't mean takes over the world, I mean takes over, jobs and replaces capitalism, there needs to be a system in place where people are getting something or being provided for, or else you're going to have pure chaos.
Right.
So I'm kind of the mind that over the next 5 to 7 years, you might see such a dramatic change where you might see this sort of hybrid model between capitalism and communism, where we're providing more for people, because if you don't, when all those jobs get lost, what happens? And it's a total disaster. And I don't really think the governments are seeing it that way. I think they're just doing what they're told. But I think the people in power really do, because if you get pure chaos, their power goes away very quickly.
Correct.
So I know it's
operate with a semblance of control.
Exactly. Yeah. So it may sound like a bit of a stretch, and it may sound like they're being benevolent. I don't think they are. I think they want control.
Yeah.
But then you kind of ask yourself, you go, what would be better? It's a tough one. What would be better? I don't know. So I don't know. That's where I think things are going.
Wow.
I guess we'll see.
I was talking about this earlier, that AI, makes you a superhuman, right? So what used to take you 4 days to write will now take you 4 hours.
Yep.
I've been using it in my own businesses from specifically course design and course development, right? So I was telling Kwame the other day, I used to sit down in rooms with the other facilitators. We'd spend 4 days working through materials and concepts and frameworks and testing them back and forth and being like, well, what do you think is a good sort of question in this? And anyway, so opened up Chat GPT the other day. I said, here's my framework, right? Create a workbook, create a guidebook, right? Through that guidebook, adjust it here, add these questions in here. What I did in 4 days would have taken me 4 or 5 days to do with other people, right? So I think there's a massive, obviously, benefit to AI.
Yep. And
in a lot of cases, it's going to obviously, and that's what was also been said, if you had 0% expertise in an area, the AI will get you up to be at least like an 80% sort of level, right? But I never thought about it from what you just described, which is how it's going to potentially disrupt modern capitalism.
Yeah, it's kind of I just sort of pieced that together over the last few days. I was like, just kind of looking at all the parts here. I'm like, this just might be where it lands. I mean, I agree. I think AI does a lot of good. I think it's also got the potential to do a lot of bad.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of AI. I mean, they've got autonomous AI killer drones. Many countries have them now.
Yeah.
Where they just program, they're like, hey, go kill. And it autonomously decides who it's going to kill. Yeah. That is insane.
Yeah.
That's insane. That is so scary.
Well, think about those drones today with the bill, which is the C63, which is it's the online harm bill, the hate speech.
It is insane. That bill is insane.
Drone shows up at your house, like, right? We found your post.
Yeah, like, dude, that's why everybody needs guns. I'm telling you, we're getting to that point.
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah. I told my buddy he should get a gun. He's got this really sort of air powered sort of BB gun. I'm like, bro, you're just gonna piss people off.
Yeah, like, no, dude.
Like, you're gonna irritate someone.
Yeah, my Meg and I are looking to, like I said, move up north right now. So as soon as we get a little bit of land, like, I'm gonna have guns in the house for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's wild. And I never used to be that way, but I'm like, I just feel like that's where the country's going. You know what I mean?
I got my gun license a long, long time ago, before any of this. And the idea was, I always said this, but first of my buddies would go trap and skeet shooting. So it's like, you wanted to kind of, not just be a guest, you wanted to roll up. But I always thought it's better to know how to use a firearm than not. It's better to know how to drive a car and drive a boat and drive a plane than not. It's better to have these types of skills.
I agree.
Right?
That's a good point.
And while I might never be a truck driver, right? If I ever need to drive a truck, right? You got a Z license, right? I know this guy. His name is it's escaping me right now. I had him on the podcast. He's one of these survivalist guys.
Cool.
Send him out in the bush, and this guy will make tools, and you'll eat squirrels, and you'll survive in like bare desert with no water. Like, this guy's like a complete survivalist. I'm like, you know what? And he teaches us. He'll take you out to these different environments, and he'll teach you how to sort of survive. And I thought, what a brilliant skill to have, which is
especially these days.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wish I had more time for stuff like that, because I would definitely engage.
Yeah. Well, you could always create the time, my man.
Yeah. Right? You know what's interesting? Like, I work every day, every single day, but I like it. I like what I do.
Yeah.
It's just what I find right now. And this is a unique situation. I've only been in this situation a few times in my life, but right now I actually can't make much time. Like, I'm not even getting to, like, I've been religious. Like, I've been an athlete my whole life. I've worked out for 25 years. I look like a buttered muffin right now, dude.
Yeah.
I can't get to the gym. Like if I can't make time to go to the gym, my life is a mess.
Right.
So I'm working like with everything we're doing with the news stuff right now. Plus just trying to do pickup and manage the restaurant stuff. Like, yeah, dude, like I'm working 85 hours a week.
First of all, that's a lot, right? 85 hours.
It's insane.
A week, right? And, as an entrepreneur, and this is like, maybe a good sort of reminder for people, there are the times you got to do the 80, 90-hour weeks. Yep. There is no such thing that beats that hard work, right? Maybe with AI, you could get that done, right?
Dude, if I didn't have AI, this wouldn't be sustainable.
Right. But you're going to have to figure out how to organize yourself better.
For sure. I mean, for me, it's like you were talking earlier upstairs. It's manpower. It's finding the right people that can do the job, and sort of replace myself to scale. Right. But the thing is, it's like, like doing this was a relatively new venture. Like you're saying, oh, do you consider yourself a journalist? I'm like, well, I guess I'm getting there. Right. But this is something that's relatively new. So I had to sort of earn my chops. I had to do all this for a long enough time so I understand it well enough so I can get other people to do it well, and so that I understand if they're doing it well.
Yeah, but that's not how you started out in your businesses. I mean, you come from construction and restaurants.
I knew how to do all those things.
Right. But when you first started those things, you kind of also most likely learned along the way as well. Like you had a little bit of like college experience and skill. You said, you know what, I'm going to open up this restaurant, and there were some better practices and some mistakes that you lived and you learned, and through that experience you developed what you have today. So maybe it is the same with this new business, which it's not so much about getting yourself to a stage of being this 100% expert, but it is about now making those right business leadership decisions and entrepreneurial decisions along your journey, so you could keep doing the work that you do, because the work that you do is really important, right? And I think this is in some capacity, I would call this a calling for you in some capacity, right?
Yeah, I guess I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's for this chapter of my life. I feel like it is. It's sort of where I need to put my focus and energy. Yeah. But when it comes to what you were saying, like with the restaurant business, I mean, I worked in restaurants since I was 15. Yeah. I didn't own my first one until I was 26. So I had 11 years of experience working every aspect of it.
I know, but 26, you're still a baby.
Oh no! Like don't get me wrong. So I knew 80% of it. Yeah. And the same thing with construction. I was swinging a hammer from the same age. Right. So my dad worked in construction. I knew a lot of it. So it's the same thing. I knew 80% of it. And I think with this news stuff is I'm getting close to that point where I know, 80, 90% of it, where I could pass it off. The difference though with this is I don't just need someone to swing a hammer. I need a very unique individual or individuals to do it. And sometimes it's a little harder to fill those roles. So I had brought a couple people on and they just couldn't quite, they couldn't quite bring my vision to life, if that maybe a nice way of putting it. So it's something I'm looking for, but I recognize that this is the thing I just continue to go back to. Is I'm like, oh, okay, I got to go do this again. Yeah. And then I try to pull out, and I'm like, oh, I got to go back again. So I would like to get there. I think, to your point, I think I know enough at this juncture to have staff and to move on and not have to do it right now. Right. But now I'm sort of battling with finding the right people. Yeah. And maybe it's about the roles that you're also trying to fulfill, right? Yeah. So, yes. This is my challenge in my business, right? Most people want Greg Witz in the room and as the guy, right? And last year I was like, you know what? I'm going to take on the majority of the deliveries and the coaching. And that's all I did last year. Right. And it was great. Right. The problem is things like business development, sales, marketing, administration, ops, all that started to sort of suffered. Right. So this year I was like, okay, how do I now, because our model has always been sort of multiple facilitators and coaches. How do I sort of, evolve what we've done in the past? So if I'm still going to be the main guy in front of the room, where do I need people picking up the slack? And what I sort of, really had this sort of reflective moment of is all the one-on-one work that we do in between the deliveries is where it kills my time. Like that can end up taking 80% of my time. I've got amazing coaches and facilitators. If I do the delivery and then they take over that one-on-one coaching session, right, that gives me relief here. It still keeps me as the main guy. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a little bit of that there for you as well, which is, what are those roles or tasks that you can get someone else to take on? So then when you are doing the writing and the researching and stuff, it's not a time management killer for you. Yeah. So the way I'm looking at it right now is what's actually getting me the most is I'm doing the newsletter. So it's like, if you downloaded it as a PDF with the pictures, it'd be about 15 to 16 pages a day. So it's a reasonable amount of work. What I'm looking for right now is I want to continue to curate it. So what I mean by that is I want to go through all the sources and I want to pick out all the stories. Yeah. Then I want someone to be able to take those and I'll give them some opinions on things that matter. Yeah. They put it all together. They put it in the email template. They choose the photos. They do all that part, and then I do the final edit and review. That's where I want to get to that point. It's just finding that person that's capable.
Right.
So because what I did was I found that, I ended up having to do more work when I had someone else fill that role. So, maybe my expectations are a little wonky, or maybe I just didn't have enough knowledge when I brought those guys in early on. So, but that would make
the
a
right,
difference.
Processes or like instructions. I heard this the other day, which was, sometimes it's more about, do they have the right instructions versus anything else? So.
Yeah, I think, so that kind of goes back to my last point. That just means that maybe I don't know it well enough.
Yeah.
If I can't explain to you exactly what I need you to do for me, then that would suggest that I'm not where I need to be. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think that's why I'm like, okay, put your hands back on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think I'm close. I think I'm right there.
Do it in balance, my man. All right. Because you don't want to end up burning out. You got a big year ahead of you.
Yeah. It's true.
All right. You're going to have a bunch of personal stuff that's going to keep you busy as well. Cool. So let's jump into being a business owner, right? You're still running your restaurant. You're running your media business now as well. Landscape of being an entrepreneur in today's world. What's changed about it? What's difficult about it? What keeps you up at night as being an entrepreneur?
It's tough to be a brick and mortar entrepreneur right now in Canada. There's not a lot of give right now. Obviously the economy's in a bit of trouble, so their disposable income is really low. That's definitely playing a role. Consumer trends just in how people are spending has also sort of changed. That was sort of a symptom of the pandemic though.
Yeah.
The other thing too is the cost of everything has gone up. And what's interesting about that is if you don't adjust your pricing accordingly, obviously your margins get hurt, right? But if you have a restaurant, like we have restaurants in Port Credit, so if you have a restaurant around a lot of other small mom and pop restaurants, they don't pay enough attention to their bottom line. So they're not looking at the increase on cost of goods for like maybe a quarter, maybe half the year, maybe a year. So they don't really realize like, oh shit, we didn't make any money this month or this quarter. Whereas people like me, like I'm every week, what's going on? But if I adjust my prices accordingly, I would price myself out of the market. So it's this weird balance, right? We have to kind of figure out, how am I going to increase my prices enough to stay afloat, but not so much that I don't price myself out. So it's this weird game you have to play right now. And that it's just one of the cycles we're in, Staffing, I mean, we're lucky we have good staff, but I think in general, it is hard to find good quality labor these days, especially in businesses like restaurants. And
I was about to say why.
So if you think about the restaurant business in general, it's very transient. It's a rotating door at the front door. It's just what it is, right? People usually work in that business for 5 to 7 years. They make their money when they're young, going through school, whatever it is, and they move on to something else. That's just the most common. Some people are lifers, love them to death. I mean, I still own them, right? But that's the most common. So through the pandemic, because we were shut down for like 531 days, you sort of lost that whole group of people that were serving. What happened was some people just moved on to the next chapter of their lives. Other people skipped it altogether. Other people were partway through it and go, okay, I've had enough. So when we got back, when everything kind of came back and it was time to open restaurants again, 60-70% of the staff were gone.
Right.
They had moved on to other things. So you end up getting labor that doesn't quite have the same experience. And that has really affected the business. Like, I can say this with confidence. If you go to a big chain, like a good one, an Earl's or a Joey or something like that,
it's different.
The service is shit right now.
Yeah.
It just is like, and don't get me wrong, you're going to have some people are going to give you good service. I don't think they're all bad, but in general, it's not even half as good as what it was. I mean, my wife and I were at a place the other day by Sherway Gardens, and, there were too many staff on to begin with. And the place was busy, but there were like, if I looked at it, I'm like, okay, you guys like 3 or 4 too many people on, but whatever, do your thing. No one was giving service. They were all communicating with each other, flirting with each other, screwing around, not really. Like my wife said, can you give me a menu? Like, what are we doing here? And we're so understanding and chill because we've been in the business.
Right.
But it was just like everything was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it was just so bad. It's just, again, it's a symptom of what the pandemic did. And, as a business owner, it just makes it hard to sort of be able to depend on those consistencies that allow you to be successful.
Yeah.
So that makes it tough. The other big thing right now with being an entrepreneur in Canada is, as an entrepreneur, you look to the government or you look to society to create this sort of firm foundation, because people like you and I start businesses and we know that they are rocky. That's on a foundation that is not very sturdy. You don't know how well it's going to go. You don't know if your Instagram account is going to get shut down. So you kind of move through this, or you're going to hire staff that can't do the job. So, but the only way that you can build this you can put this thing together is when you're on a firm foundation. Otherwise, if everything's shaky, you've got no chance.
Correct.
The problem is society is shaky.
Yeah.
Everything that the government is doing right now is shaky. We don't have a lot of Like the economy is a total mess. We don't know what's going to happen. Everything's a little up and down. Everything's politicized right now. And there's all this policy going in and out of places that's affecting all these other businesses. So as an entrepreneur, you can't really build a business right now with any real confidence because you look at the government and you're going, well, that's a total disaster. So for a lot of people right now, my honest advice for a lot of people would be sit and wait.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in the brick and mortar space, I would say sit and wait.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's different times. And, I was chatting with, his name is Dan Arley. He is a professor of psychology and behavioral economics. He is known as the half beard guy. I don't know if you've ever seen him. So he had he was in an explosion. He was burnt.
Damn.
Israeli, wicked dude, by the way. Anyway, he said something. He says, and I'm just paraphrasing. He was like, people haven't fully recovered from the residual effect of the pandemic, specifically when it comes down to people.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of people have become so used to spending their time with their nuclear family that they are in some cases messed up when it comes down to communicating, interacting, socializing, working in these environments outside of that family. So your comment earlier, which is we're at the restaurant, they're all sort of corrugated together, right? Hanging out in a little sort of bubble, right? Because that becomes sort of that safe. But there's not an insight and an effort to be like, all right, well, in this particular case, let me go do my job and serve the table.
Yeah.
Right. And there's got to be this sort of re-education and schooling and developing of people how to operate more normally in group and social environments, right? So, I can see, and to your point, like an Knowles or a Joey, I mean, the service there was stellar. In fact, I remember pitching Joey early when they came to Canada around customer service training. Like, hey, let's work with your hostess and your servers and your managers, and right. And we got pretty far into the conversation and started to discover like their internal training programs were extraordinary.
Yeah.
Right. But you don't see that type of sort of impact today. Right. In fact, I went to a store in Yorkdale the other day. So I went to, in fact, I'll say it's Sage, right? The little nebulizers makes your room smell nice, like, rainforest, right? Mint, pine, like a little spa. Anyway, they're fantastic for their customer service. Your little nebulizer breaks, you roll in, you take it in there, and they, no questions asked, change it out. Thank you very much. So I rolled in there. It's cool. She's masked up, right? And I'm like, hi, got this nebulizer. I literally just bought it a month ago. It's not sort of steaming the way it should. She's with this attitude, right? Well, what's the problem? I was like, nebulizer is not working. So I'm wondering two things. Can I trade this one in and buy a bigger one? Can we change this one out? And I'm still going to buy another one. She's like, well, we need to test it. I'm like, great, fucking test it. Like, do whatever you need to do. Anyway, this big dramatic exercise. She opens it up and she's like, what is this? I'm like, what is what? She's showing me the lid. She's like, did you do something to this? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, no, this is the thing. She's like, well, I've never seen it like this. I'm like, I don't even know what to say to you. All right. Like, it's a brand new thing. I brought it in. I want the fucking thing to smoke and bubble and make my room smelly. And like, just tell me if it works. If it doesn't work, change it out for me. Fast forward. Anyway, this attitude. And at one point, I found myself thinking, I'm going to say something, right? In a pretty aggressive way, which is like, do you have any idea on how you're speaking? And I paused for a second and I thought, this is the issue with people right now, right? There's just this misunderstanding, misfiring on how to navigate people. And it's because people haven't been around people for so long, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I also think social media is making people awkward as well. They look through the filter of what's online. I think that makes it a little more challenging. And, there's this other thing, which I don't mean to like kind of poke fun at them or, pick on them or anything, but like, you said mask. So right away, you're speaking to a liberal. Yeah. And that's okay. But what the media is doing right now, what our government is doing right now is telling liberals that you're right about everything and everyone else is wrong. Correct. So they live on this moral high ground. So they use that air of arrogance. That's
well said and well described.
They carry it with them everywhere. And that's what you're running into. So someone's just, it's challenging. Yeah. Those other things are also contributing to that sort of, that misbehavior, and unfortunately, I think that there are things you pick up along the way in life. If you don't pick up a certain skill at a certain time, you are not going to be able to do it as an adult. So for example, Rotational sports impact. If you don't learn to kick or fight or throw a punch or throw a ball before you hit puberty, pretty much you don't have that. You're not going to have that skill with great dominance beyond puberty. You're not going to have it. So it's just it gets wired in and strengthens over that time. Similar with something like this, when you shut people down and they don't get any social development for 4 to 5 years from there, and pick an age. It could have been a 15-year-old to a 19-year-old, a 19-year-old to a 23-year-old. Doesn't matter. There are different things we all picked up during those periods. These people did not get those things. Right. I don't think they're going to. Yeah. I think there's going to be a generational gap. So, these people are going to be a problem. And then we'll fix it with the next generation. That's all we can do,
Yeah. What do they say? First generation builds it. Second generation grows it. Third generation fucks it up.
There you go.
So I think we're on the third generation right now.
Rice paddy to rice paddy.
And it's our kids that are going to fix it, right? The alphas.
I think, exactly. Yeah. Because the thing is, we can express to them what has gone wrong. We can say, hey, they tried this. They fucked it up. Right. Don't do these things. Or here's what you can do that works. Right. But you need to go through that big mess before you can fix it. That's just kind of, that's what it is.
All right. State of affairs for the U.S. 2024 election year.
Oh my God. I know. So wild down there. I have a buddy who I very much trust. He sees the world like, you and I do. He lives down in the States, and he's like, look, because we were thinking about moving there. My wife and I were going to move to Texas. A lot of reasons why, but we decided not to. One of them was the gun thing. I do support people having guns, but the gun violence down there is pretty bad. Yeah. And I just had this gut feeling where I was like, if anything ever happened to my family because we moved down there due to gun violence, I'd never forgive myself. Yeah. So I had to sort of pump the brakes on that. But sort of a bit of a tangent there.
There's your true Canadian coming out.
Yeah, well, it just concerns you. Like Texas next to California's got the highest rate of gun violence. Yeah. So you kind of look at that and you're like, I don't know, you're putting yourself in the line of fire a little bit. Yeah. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, when you look at the numbers, it's statistically, implausible to have that kind of fear. Yeah. I understand that. Yeah. However, if anything did happen, I knew that I would. So anyway, the other thing was though, he goes, look, don't move down here till after the election. He goes, even then, probably wait another 6 months. Yeah. He goes, shit is going to be very wild down here because you've got both parties, right? And I love that they're both saying, if you vote for the other guy, it's going to ruin democracy, which is insane because being able to vote means you have a democracy. Correct. So it's such stupid rhetoric. It drives me absolutely nuts. But let's be realistic. Neither one of these guys should be running the country. They're both incredibly divisive. Joe Biden is completely compromised. Yeah. Like completely. And honestly, like Donald Trump should not be a politician. He shouldn't. I mean, the guy's an egomaniac. He really is. Don't get me wrong. You need a Republican government down there right now to fix what the left is doing. Same thing in Canada. I still don't think they're the answer. They're not the end all and be all. But Donald Trump is such a divisive character. Yeah. No matter what, you're gonna have a big, big problem down there. You know what I mean? So I'm a little concerned for what happens in the States. Yeah. I don't.
So who is the candidate? I mean, RFK's not.
RFK's your guy.
He is the guy.
I would love to see RFK. Well, he's making a critical error right now, right? So. He is going to, from what I understand, he's either going to put Jesse Ventura or Aaron Rodgers in as his VP. No. God, what are you doing, bro? Pick someone like Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard right now. Tulsi Gabbard's amazing. She's perfect, right? Awesome. Because she just disassociated with the Democratic Party. Yeah. So did RFK. She's not fully a Republican yet, even though she's leaning that way. So she's an independent. Yeah. She's got experience. She was in the multiple tours in the war. Like she is the right person, a career politician. Her dad was a career politician. That would be such a great solution to this VP problem he has. But instead, he's probably going to go with someone like Ventura or Aaron Rodgers. Here's the problem. Ventura was in politics 20 years ago. He was an independent. He's a little divisive. He was in the WWF.
I was going to say, and he was a wrestler, right?
Yeah, and then Aaron Rodgers. I love Aaron Rodgers. I think he's intelligent. Yeah. He's got zero experience and is seen as this anti-vax dumb jock to the rest of society. Not me, but that's how people see him. And then you have to think about this. As your VP, what happens to the president? Well, what happened to all the Kennedys? Right? So then you have to look and go, you want Aaron Rodgers running your country?
Wow, I didn't even think about that. What happened to all the Kennedys?
So, I mean, I think if he had gone with Gabbard, I think he'd have a reasonable chance or a better chance. I would love to see him in. He is, how you know that
smart guy.
He really is, and he means well, and I think he's carrying himself very professionally. Yeah. I love his perspective on 99% of things. I think he's a little hawkish with war still, but whatever, you're going to get what you get. America's still the world's biggest bully, so whatever. Yeah. But the problem you have is, at the end of the day, no one's going to let an independent get in. There's legislation in place that's going to make it very hard for him.
Yeah.
That is like it's bipartisan. They both implemented this together so they could keep it a two-party race, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think he's got a great chance, but I would love to see him in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what's happened right now is a couple things. First of all, the media has made being conservative a pariah, right? The media's done it because at the end of the day, look, right now, if you look at the polls in Canada, you're going to get a super majority for conservatives, but people still don't want to admit they're conservative because of what the media has done, right?
Mm-hmm.
They make you look like you're a problem or you're a Trumper, you're a MAGA, you're this, you're that, you're simple-minded, you're into this type of religion or that or whatever, you're a conspiracy theorist. They throw all these terms at you. So the media has done a really good job at smearing the other side.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see that they're still winning because of the foundation of their actual values. You know, I think the problem with Trump, though, is he actually makes their case for them because he's like a caricature of a human being. The guy's not even real. Like have you heard of this theory of kayfabe? So it's one of the Weinstein brothers, Eric or Brett, I'm not sure which one. So they had this, they wrote a dissertation on it. So this idea of kayfabe is where you watch the WWF, for example, you watch wrestling and you pretend like it's real,
Right.
but you know it's not. So you let them do whatever and you just kind of play along with it because it's fun, right? It's the same thing with Donald Trump. People let him say and do things that they know are not real. They give him that flexibility. Like when he says he's going to nuke, North Korea and jokes about it on Twitter. If Barack Obama had said that, what do you think the world would have done? But with Trump, they go, he's just fucking around.
Yeah.
So they let him get away with it. But the thing is, now look what that does to the party. It illegitimizes the party because it makes them a bit of a joke as well. So I think it actually plays to their favor that Trump is there. I think it makes the Republicans an easier target, right? So if you had someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, who I think is sharp as a tack, I think he's very, very intelligent, a little inexperienced, but very intelligent.
Yeah.
You can't frame the Republican Party the same way. Or even a guy like RFK, you can't frame it the same way. He makes it easy to turn the Republicans into the bad guy.
Yeah, smart. Very smart. All right, so end of the episode, we come to some better human questions, but we're going to expand upon this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So first question is, what do you think we all need to do to have better health tomorrow?
Oh gosh, to have better health tomorrow. I mean, it's pretty basic. You got to eat food with single ingredients and you got to work out 4 to 5 times a week. It is so simple.
Yeah.
And this is your body. Nothing else matters if you don't have your health.
Right.
So do these simple things. Like you tell me to make time. I do look a little bit like a buttered muffin right now, but I still do make time and I do eat right. And the thing is, let me put it this way too. You don't have to completely flip your diet on its head.
Correct.
I do this thing called implementing the right things first. So if you eat terrible, let's say you eat an average American diet, 1 meal a day, chicken and broccoli and rice. That's your job. Have all the other crap you want, but have that 1 meal. Next week, 2 meals.
Yeah.
Then still eat the crap you want. And then you slowly continue to implement the right things. And it's easier by eliminating those things versus doing it all at once. Because if you flip it on its head, you're going to fail.
Correct.
That's kind of what it is. And it goes the same with working out. Look, if you don't do anything, go for a walk.
Yeah.
Get started. Then start working out. Then start doing these things. And look, there's no one way to work out. Working out is one of those things that I used to go, you got to lift weights, got to be a bodybuilder like I was. Great, got to do that. You don't. You have to be healthy. Whatever you like to do that keeps you physically active, do that. That's perfectly fine, you know?
Love that answer. Just move. I totally agree with that. All right. What do you think we all need to do to be better leaders and entrepreneurs tomorrow?
You want to be a better leader and a better entrepreneur? I think you have to listen more. I know it's listen more and honestly, put yourself in other people's shoes. And I think that's maybe more important now than ever because everyone's kind of battling with a lot of these psychological problems these days because of the state of the world. So I think if you put yourself in other people's shoes, you can communicate a lot better and understand them and you'll always get a better result.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard this the other day, which is the difference between perception and perspective, right? Perception is the way we look at the world. Mm-hmm. Perspective is looking at it from another person's lens.
Exactly.
And we need more perspective.
Good point.
Right. What do you think we all need to do to be better spouses tomorrow?
Oh man.
And then also better parents tomorrow.
Yes. Better spouses. You know what is interesting for me? I try to take a step back with my wife. I love my wife so much. We've been together for 20 years. She's an amazing woman. She does so much for me. And I do everything I can for her all the time. But one of the things that I've tried to do lately is you talk about perspective. I know this is a bit of a crossover from the previous answer, but I think it's important. When you're with someone for a long time, you get comfortable. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you don't realize how you're behaving. You think that you're being okay, or you think that you're behaving in such a way, but your spouse is that person that gets every part of you. And sometimes you express feelings or you communicate in a way that's not quite as decent as you might think. Maybe they're the punching bag once in a while because life can be tough. Lose all your businesses, see how you feel. That could be challenging. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to listen to the way I speak to my wife, because I love her so much, but sometimes I don't communicate in a way that's always the kindest. And I don't mean anything by that. It's just sort of a pattern I've gotten myself into. So that's one of the things I try to really keep an eye on, is how I'm actually speaking to her. And kind of, I catch myself in it sometimes. I'm like, hey, that was a little harsh. Never like mean, but I'm like, hey, that was a bit harsh. Right. Or hey, I probably made you feel stupid when I said that. Because you say things like you expect them to know or to feel the same way you do because they're so connected to you. But that's one thing I try to keep an eye on. I try to just, watch from someone else's shoes to see how I'm behaving.
Cool. Managing your behavior and communication. Love it. Better parent. What do you think you all need to do to be a better parent?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm just about to start this journey. It's interesting. I would just sort of take a look back at how I was raised. Yeah. I had a great upbringing. My parents were phenomenal. But you do look at things that they sort of fell short on, no fault of their own. It's just where they were. Yeah. For me, one of the biggest things is I want to provide my children with as much information as they're capable of managing at the time to give them sort of a leg up. But I want them to just really grow and blossom into whatever they want to be, and just give them all those tools and not try to direct them into whatever I think is best, because I don't even know what's best for me. Yeah. So,
I'm going to send you 2 books. I normally tell people to buy these 2 books, but I'll send them to you.
I appreciate that.
It's a book called The Baby Book, which is going to tell you everything you need to know, like a tech manual for a baby from 0 to 2. And it was written by 3 PhDs. It was recommended to me by my ex-partner, who was a clinical psychologist, who was a real bastard, but I got a few things from him, this being one of them. And the way the book is written, which is, if this is what's happening with the baby, this is what your choices are. Mm-hmm. So it's not prescriptive around you should do this. It's like, here's sleep training, or like feeding, or like this, like you could do this, you could do this, or you could do this kind of thing. But it breaks it down for you.
Thank you.
And the other one's Dr. Shefali's book, who I'm a big fan of. It's called The Conscious Parent. Amazing. Which is what you just described, which is, instead of me unconsciously projecting who my kids should be, I'm going to sort of really pay attention to helping them discover their individuality themselves.
Exactly.
Super cool. Final question. What do you think we all need to do to be better humans tomorrow?
Embrace change. The world is going to be very, very different in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years. Everything is going to change, whether it's AI, whether it's politics, economics. You're looking at world wars. Things are changing rapidly, and I think that we need to embrace it and move with the times. So I believe if people start embracing change today, you'll be a better human.
It's awesome. Love it. All right, for the audience, Jonathan, where can people learn more about you? Drop all your links, Blendr reports.
You can join us on the Blendr report on Instagram. It's Jonathan Harvey on Instagram, and then the Blendr news on everything else. If you want to hop in there, you'll find us.
Yeah. So it's Blendr, BLENDR.
Yes, we did that so we could get all the handles. Yeah. So it's BLENDR news. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's on Instagram and all the other platforms.
Yes.
And are you still doing your car videos?
I did one the other day, but it was actually for Blendr News. I want to. I'm having a little trouble making the time for it. Yeah. But I think once I replace maybe myself in doing the writing, I'm going to get back into that because I really enjoy it.
Well, maybe on that note, anyone listening to this episode, if you know an amazing writer and an amazing thinker, and someone that could operate with a solid decisiveness when coming down to the writing, reach out to Jonathan.
Please and thank you.
Anything else you want to drop for the audience?
No, that's everything.
All right, cool. Well, for the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like it, subscribe to it, share it, smash some of those stars. It all helps us get the podcast out to even further people. If you're not following Jonathan Harvey, go and follow him. Go and follow Blendr News for your daily digest of journalism. Yeah. All right. Thank you for everything you're doing, man. I
Amazing.
enjoyed this conversation.